You think ancient economies were simple? Barter systems, simple trades, grain for livestock, labor for shelter, primitive? Here's the truth. The economic system Jesus of Nazareth lived under was more sophisticated, more extractive, and more systematically brutal than most modern economies. It had multiple competing currencies, layered taxation systems, debt instruments, credit markets, wealth concentration mechanisms that would make modern billionaires jealous. And at the center of it all, a religious institution that functioned as a central bank, a treasury, and a tax collection agency, all rolled into one. The temple in Jerusalem wasn't just a place of worship, it was the economic engine of an entire civilization. And when Jesus walked into that temple and flipped the tables of the money changers, he wasn't making a religious statement, he was attacking the economic system itself. Let me show you how it worked. The world of Roman Palestine, 1st century CE, the land of Judea, Galilee, Samaria. Population, roughly 2.5 million people. 90% of them farmers, fishermen, laborers, ruled by Rome, occupied, garrisoned, controlled. But here's what most people don't understand. Roman Palestine wasn't just politically occupied, it was economically colonized. Every mechanism of the economy was designed to extract wealth from the population and funnel it upward, to Rome, to the temple, to the local elites. And the average person? They existed to be extracted from. Let's break down how. The three currencies. Walk into a market in Jerusalem in 30 CE. You need to buy bread. Simple, right? Wrong. Because first you need to figure out which money, the denarius, Roman imperial currency, the denarius, silver coin, stamped with the face of Emperor Tiberius. On one side, Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. On the other, Pontifex Maximus, high priest. This coin is required for Roman taxes, the tribute, the occupation tax. It's legal tender throughout the empire. You can use it anywhere Rome controls. But here's the problem. It's graven imagery. A violation of the second commandment. Faithful Jews aren't supposed to carry it, and yet they must. Because Rome demands payment in denarii, the temple shekel, sacred currency. Then there's the Tyrian shekel, minted in Tyre, pure silver. This is the only currency accepted at the temple for the half-shekel temple tax, for sacrificial offerings, for ritual purchases. Why Tyrian shekels? Because they're the highest grade silver available. The temple demands purity, but here's the irony. Tyrian shekels also bear graven images. The god Melkart on one side, an eagle on the other, pagan imagery on the sacred currency of the temple, local bronze coins, everyday money. And then there's the small stuff. Bronze coins, minted by local rulers, Herod, Pontius Pilate, local tetrarchs. These are for everyday transactions, buying bread, paying laborers, small trades, low value, high circulation, the exchange problem. So imagine you're a Galilean fisherman. You've been paid in bronze coins for your catch. You need to pay your Roman tax. Denarii required. You need to pay your temple tax. Shekels required. You need to exchange your bronze for silver. But the exchange rate controlled by money changers. And those money changers, they take a cut every single time. It's a system designed to bleed you at every transaction. The taxation system. Now let's talk about taxes. Because if you lived in Roman Palestine, you didn't pay a tax. You paid taxes. Plural, layered, unavoidable. The Roman tribute. First, the tribute to Caesar. Every adult male paid a poll tax. 1 denarius per year. Doesn't sound like much, right? Wrong. 1 denarius was a full day's wage for a laborer. In a subsistence economy where most people lived hand to mouth, 1 denarius was the difference between eating and starving. And that's just the poll tax. There was also land tax, 10 to 20% of your harvest. Customs duties on goods moving between regions, road tolls, port fees, all collected by publicans, tax farmers. The tax farming system. Here's how it worked. Rome didn't collect taxes directly. Too inefficient. Instead, they auctioned off the right to collect taxes in a region. A wealthy local, a publican, would bid for the contract. Pay Rome up front. Then he'd go collect from the population. Whatever he collected above what he paid Rome, he kept. So if Rome wanted 100,000 denarii from Galilee, and the publican collected 150,000, he pocketed 50,000. This is why tax collectors, publicans, were hated. They were collaborators and extortionists. Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples, former tax collector, seen as a traitor. The temple tax. But Rome wasn't the only one taxing you. The temple in Jerusalem demanded a half-shekel tax annually from every Jewish male over 20. This funded priestly salaries, sacrificial animals, temple maintenance, the religious bureaucracy. And unlike Roman taxes, you couldn't avoid this one. It was a religious obligation. Tithes and offerings. And then there were tithes. 10% of your harvest to the Levites, another 10% for festivals, another 10% every third year for the poor. In practice, 20 to 30% of your agricultural output went to religious obligations. Add it all up. Roman taxes, 30 to 40% of income, temple tax and tithes, 20 to 30% of income. You're looking at 50 to 70% of everything you produce going to taxes. And you're left with just enough to survive. Barely. The debt economy. So what happens when you can't pay? Debt. And in the first century, debt wasn't just a financial problem. It was an existential threat. How debt worked. You borrow grain to plant your fields. You promise to repay after harvest, but the harvest fails. Drought, locusts, blight. You can't repay. So the debt rolls over, with interest, and the interest compounds. Within a few years, you owe double what you borrowed, then triple, then 10 times. You can't pay, so you offer collateral. First, your land, then your livestock, then your tools, then your children, and finally, yourself. Debt slavery. This is how debt slavery worked. You couldn't pay your debts, so you sold yourself or your family into servitude. Not chattel slavery, though that existed too, but debt bondage. You worked for your creditor until the debt was paid off. In theory, this was temporary. In practice, it was often permanent, because while you're working off your debt, you're not farming your land, so you're not earning income. So you can't pay down the debt. It's a trap. And by Jesus' time, massive portions of the rural population were trapped in it. Some scholars estimate 30 to 40% of the population was in debt bondage at any given time. The Jubilee that never came. Jewish law had a solution, the Jubilee. Every 50 years, all debts were supposed to be forgiven. All land returned to original owners, all slaves freed. A hard reset. But here's the thing. There's no historical evidence the Jubilee was ever actually observed. It was a law on the books, a promise, a hope, but the powerful had no incentive to enforce it, so the debts kept compounding. The land kept concentrating, the people kept sinking. The temple economy. Now let's talk about the temple, because this is where it all comes together. The temple in Jerusalem wasn't just a religious site. It was an economic machine, the sacrificial system. Jewish law required sacrifices for sin offerings, for festivals, for Thanksgiving. You couldn't just bring any animal. It had to be unblemished, ritually pure. And who decided if your animal was pure? The temple priests. Here's how it worked. You bring a lamb from your farm. You've raised it. You know it's perfect. The temple inspector examines it, finds a blemish, a tiny spot, a slight limp. Not acceptable. But don't worry. The temple has pre-approved lambs for sale. Right here. Convenient. At 10 times the market price. So you're forced to buy from the temple merchants. Who pay a cut to the priests? The currency exchange. And remember those money changers? They weren't just helpful businessmen offering a service. They were part of the temple system. You arrive at the temple with your denarii, your bronze coins. Not accepted. Temple shekel only. So you exchange. At whatever rate the money changers set, they take their cut. The temple gets its tax. Everyone profits, except you. The economic scale. Let's put this in perspective. During Passover, Jerusalem's population swelled from 40,000 to over 200,000. Every single person needed to pay the temple tax, buy sacrificial animals, make offerings. The temple was processing millions of transactions, taking cuts on every single one. It was the economic center of the entire region, employing thousands, controlling vast wealth, wielding enormous power. The high priest wasn't just a religious figure, he was the CEO of the largest economic enterprise in Judea. Why Jesus flipped tables. Now we come to the most famous economic protest in history. Jesus walks into the temple, sees the money changers, the merchants selling sacrificial animals, and he loses it, flips their tables, drives them out with a whip, shouts, "You have made it a den of thieves." Most people read this as a religious statement. Jesus angry at commercialization of sacred space. But look closer. The economic critique. Jesus wasn't angry at commerce in general. He was angry at this specific system, a system that forced the poor to pay inflated prices for religious obligations, profited from monopolistic currency exchange, turned worship into extraction, made the priest rich while the people starved. The money changers weren't just doing business. They were the interface between the sacred and the economic, the mechanism that turned faith into profit. And Jesus saw it for what it was, systematic exploitation dressed up as holiness. The political implications? This wasn't just religious theater, it was economic disruption. In the heart of the temple, during Passover, the busiest, most profitable time of year, Jesus didn't just flip tables, he shut down the system, even if only for an hour. The temple authorities couldn't ignore this. It wasn't blasphemy that got Jesus killed, it was attacking the economic order. Within a week, he was crucified. The charge? King of the Jews, a political crime. But the real crime? Threatening the revenue stream. Modern parallels. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the system Jesus lived under, it's not that different from ours. Layered extraction. Then, Roman tax plus temple tax plus tithes plus offerings equals 50 to 70% extraction. Now, income tax plus sales tax plus property tax plus fees plus inflation equals 40 to 60% extraction. The mechanisms change. The percentage stays the same. Currency control, then multiple currencies, forced exchanges, money changer fees. Now, fiat currency, foreign exchange fees, credit card processing fees, bank charges. Every transaction, someone takes a cut. Debt bondage, then agricultural debt, loss of land, debt slavery. Now, student loans, medical debt, credit cards, wage slavery. You're not legally enslaved, but try walking away from your debts. Try living without participating in the system. The temple economy, then the temple as central bank, tax authority, and religious institution. Now, the Federal Reserve, the IRS, and the banking system. Separate institutions, same function. Control the money. Control the people. The powerful get richer. Then, wealth concentrated in the hands of priests, Roman elites, and tax farmers. Now, wealth concentrated in the hands of, well, the system hasn't changed. It's just gotten better at hiding itself. Final revelation, here's what the temple economy teaches us. Economic systems aren't neutral. They're designed by someone for a purpose, and that purpose is usually the same. Extract wealth from the many, funnel it to the few. In first century Palestine, the system was visible, brutal, obvious. Roman soldiers, temple guards, tax collectors at the gate. You could see the extraction happening. Today, it's hidden, sophisticated, automated, taxes withheld before you see your paycheck, inflation eating your savings, fees buried in fine print. But the function is the same. Jesus didn't flip tables because he was anti-commerce. He flipped tables because he saw a system that claimed to be about God, but was actually about power and profit. That used religious obligation to justify economic exploitation. That made the poor pay for the privilege of worship. And 2,000 years later, we're still living in systems designed the same way. Not by accident, not by evolution, by design. The names change, the mechanisms evolve, the technology advances, but the pattern remains. Those who control the money control everything else. And the rest of us, we're still standing in line at the money changers, still paying the tribute, still working off debts we can never quite escape. The economy in the time of Jesus wasn't primitive. It was a blueprint, and we're still building from it.